So, that was the great epidemic of 1846.
God. What I seen since I was 15-year-old. Many take the powers of God, what I seen. They'd have killed me long ago for what I know. Only I took the first and second oaths of Dagon off in Obed, so I be protected. Unless in a jury I've improved, I told things knowing and deliberate. But I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It was around Civil War time when children born since 46 begun to grow up. Some of them, that is. I see 'em swimming in and out of the river from that cursed reef of Satan, and I see more and more attic windows getting boarded up.
But surely if this were all true, people from the outside of Innsmouth would have noticed, would have done something.
Well, sir, that be the beauty of it. Nobody will believe nothing. Folks outside call them gold-like things pirate loot, and allow as how Innsmouth folks has fur and blood or is distempered or something. Besides, them that lives here shoes off as many strangers as they can. Used to be right bad with horses. Beasts would balk at the critters. Horses worse than mules. But when they got automobiles, well, that was all right.
And Obed Marsh got away with all of this. Didn't anyone try and do something about him?
Oh, yeah. Someone did do something about him, just not who'd you expect. In 46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town never see. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them as he'd called in. Had 3 children by her. 2 has disappeared young, but one gal has looked like anybody else and was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham fella as didn't suspect nothing. But nobody outside will have nothing to do with Innsmouth folks now. Obed, he died in 78. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson. He's about changed. Can't shut his eyes no more and is all out of shape. Ain't been seen about in public nigh on 10 year. Married a poor little Ipswich gal. Hey, you. Why don't you say something? How'd you like to be living here in a town like this? With everything a rotten and a dying and boarded up monsters crawling and bleating and barking and hopping around black cellars and attics every way you turn, hey? How'd you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches and order of Dagon Hall and know what's doing part of the howling? How'd you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmass, hey? Curse you! Don't sit there a-staring at me with them eyes! I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and he's got to stay there! In hell, I says, can't get me. I ain't done nothing, nor told nobody nothing.
That's not true anymore, Mr. Allen.
Huh?
You've told me.
You, young fella. Hell, I ain't told you nothing yet. You just sit still and listen to me, boy. This is what I ain't never told nobody. I says I didn't do no prying after that night, but I found things out just the same.
Did you hear something?
Want to know what the real horror is, hey?
I thought I heard something.
Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils is done, but what they're a-gone to do. They're a-bringing things up out of the sea, been doing it for years. Them houses north of the river between Water and Main Streets is full of them. Them devils and what they brung. And when they get ready, I say, when they get ready. You ever hear tell of a Shoggoth? Hey, you hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen them one night.
There is something out there.
Huh?
Out there on the beach. Can't you hear it?
Get out of here.
What?
Get out of here! They seen us! Get out for your life! Don't wait for nothing!
But what about you?
They know now! It don't matter no more. Run for it, quick! Out of this town, run! Run, get your homie! Many, take to a thousand! Yarina! Cthulhu Fatan!
When I reached Water Street, I paused in my panic and looked back towards the sea. There was no remaining trace of Zedek Allen. I can hardly describe the mood in which I was left by this harrowing episode. An episode at once mad and pitiful, grotesque and terrifying. The grocery boy had prepared me for it, yet the reality left me nonetheless bewildered and disturbed. For real though the story was, old Zadok's insane earnestness and horror had communicated to me a mounting unrest, which joined with my earlier sense of loathing for the town and its blight of intangible shadows. What had I heard, dragging along the sand, and what had happened to Zedek Allen? there in the dying light on that grimy beach. I had seen and heard enough in shadow-haunted Innsmouth. I hurried back to the hotel and the now eagerly awaited bus. There was something very disturbing about the square when I reached it. It seemed as if all the loiterers in town were congregated around the door of the Gilman house. It seemed as if many bulging, watery, unwinking eyes looked oddly at me as I claimed my valise in the lobby, and I hoped that none of these unpleasant creatures would be my fellow passengers on the coach. And then I was again face to face with Joe Gentry, the owner and operator of that disreputable vehicle.
Afraid I got some bad news for you, sir. There be something wrong with the engine. Needs repair bad. Nearly left us stranded in the middle of the road just outside of town.
Well, what? Can't it be repaired?
Hey, problem be, it's gonna take some time, all. You gotta pull that engine out and break her down. All night job.
But I've got to get to Arkham. I can't afford to stay the night in Innsmouth.
It ain't no problem, sir. It be taken care of.
What's this?
Tain't your fault you be stuck in Innsmouth. Figured I'd make it up to you. That'd be a key to the best room in the Gilman house. Compliments of Joe Gentry. You just get a good night's sleep and see if we don't have you out of here bright and early tomorrow, sir. Just see if we don't.
So I turned and walked into that unwholesome-looking building, aware of the unblinking eyes that watched my progress, and even more aware of the fact that Gentry's bus had sounded no different when it had pulled up than it had during my previous journey on board it.
Here you be, sir. Room 428, best in a Gilman. 2 windows, a nice view of the town, a good sea air coming in. A bath be down the hall, last door on the left.
There's no inside bolt on this door.
Yeah, the inside bolt broke off a while back. Gotta fix it one of these days. The key lock works, though. Enjoy your stay, sir.
I dropped a coin into the clerk's unbelievably thick, clumsy hands, and he shuffled out of the room. The room was a dismal one with bare, cheap furnishings in the 2 previously mentioned windows. It was permeated with the lethal mustiness that blended hideously with the town's general fishy odor and plunged my mind even deeper into thoughts of death and decay.
How'd you like to be living in a town like this? With everything a-rotting and dying and boarded-up monsters crawling and bleating and barking and hopping around black cellars and attics every way you turn.
I found myself at the windows, looking out over a dingy courtyard otherwise hemmed in by low, deserted brick blocks, and beyond, a view of decrepit westward-stretching roof with the marshy countryside beyond. There was a trace of an abandoned railway, and a deepening gloom that seemed to settle into my very soul.
How'd you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches in order a day gone home, and know what's doing part of the howling?
In that dark and hateful room, the whispers and legends of Innsmouth begin to take on a new and frightening reality. I finally felt compelled to do something about it. I took the 3-in-1 device on my keyring and transferred the bolt from my wardrobe to the door.
How'd you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmass, hey? Think the old man's crazy, hey? Well, sir, let me tell you, that ain't the worst.
And then I pushed the bureau in front of it.
That ain't the worst. That ain't the worst. That ain't the worst.
Then I was awoken from a fitful slumber by the sound of footsteps outside my room, and there came that soft, damnably unmistakable sound, which seemed like a malignant fulfillment of all my apprehensions. Without the least shadow of a doubt, the lock of my door was being tried, cautiously, furtively, tentatively, with a key. And then I was out of bed, my trembling hands questing hungrily for the curtains that covered the grimy windows. The readiness with which I fell into a plan of action proved that I must have been subconsciously fearing some menace and considering possible avenues of escape for hours. I ripped the ancient vellum drapes from the windows and began to tie them into strips. And then I had the window open and was throwing my improvised ladder out. The sick, fishy odor of Innsmouth flooded past me as I worked to secure one end to the bed. Finally, I was ready, and swinging out of the window and down that rotting rope, I left behind me forever the morbid and horror-infested fabric of the Gilman house, and not a moment too soon. I landed safely on the loose, grass-grown cobblestones of the street and fled across them to the dubious sanctuary of a ruined Payne Street doorway. As I did, I looked to the north and saw lights blazing ominously from the Order of Dagon Hall and the Baptist and Congregationalist churches. I hid, gasping from exertion and terror. Then the door of the Gilman house burst open, and a large crowd of doubtful shapes poured forth, lanterns bobbing in the darkness and horrible creaking voices exchanging low cries in what was certainly not English. I recognized the now familiar shape of Joe Gentry gesturing wildly into the night, apparently giving orders to the shambling horde, and behind him I perceived that one figure was strangely robed and unmistakably surmounted by a tall tiara. I turned and ran deeper into the diseased shadows of Innsmouth. The night was alive with alarms and guttural cries. All the roads out of town seemed to be blocked. Affecting the distinctive Innsmouth shuffle, I made my way along South Street to the sea. Far beyond the breakwater was the dim, dark line of Devil Reef. And as I glimpsed it, I saw intermittent flashes of light on its low outline. I looked back at the town and saw answering flashes from the lofty cupola of the Gilman house. For a moment, I stood there transfixed and watched the cynical, flashing of those nameless, unexplained beacons. And then I was off and running south, past the yawning black doorways and fishily staring windows of the deserted nightmare buildings, for at a close glance, I saw the moonlight waters between the reef and the shore were far from empty. They were alive, with a teeming horde of shapes swimming inward towards the town. And even at my vast distance and in my single moment of perception, I could tell that the bobbing heads and flailing arms were alien and abhorrent. The deep ones were hurrying to the hunt. I ran. My only hope lay to the north, to the long-abandoned railway trestle that led to Raleigh in safety. It was just possible that the mob would not look for me there. It was a briar-choked desolation, nearly impassable. I hugged the crumbling walls and collapsing doorways of Innsmouth as my hunters ran and hopped past me, their very numbers hiding me as well in the shadows. Too many of them wore voluminous robes, and at least one a peaked diadem that glistened whitely in the moonlight. At last, I reached the trestle and began to make my way cautiously across it. It was rotting and in several places had collapsed altogether, but I finally made my way to the other side and glanced back the way I had came. The ancient spires and roofs of decayed Innsmouth gleamed lovely and ethereal in the magic yellow moonlight, and I thought how they must have looked in the old days before the shadow fell. And then that beautiful image was shattered by what I saw marching for the town from the sea. My other pursuers had been accursedly abnormal. These had no hint of the normal about them at all. They came in an endless stream, flopping, hopping, croaking, bleeding, surging inhumanly through the spectral moonlight in a grotesque, malignant saraband. And some of them had tall tiaras of whitish gold metal, and some were strangely robed, and one who led the way was clad in a ghoulish, humped black coat and striped trousers, and a man's felt hat perched on the shapeless thing that was his head. I think their predominant color was a grayish-green, though they had white bellies. They were mostly shiny and slippery, but the ridges of their backs were scaly. Their heads were the heads of fish, with prodigious bulging eyes that never closed at the sides. Of their necks were palpitating gills, and their long paws were webbed. They hopped irregularly, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. Their croaking, braying voices, clearly used for articulate speech, held all the dark shades of expression their staring faces lacked. They were the blasphemous fish frogs of the nameless design, living and horrible. Their number was a limitless swarm past guessing. They were still streaming past when they were finally blotted out by my own unconsciousness. I awoke the next day in the brush-grown railroad cut. And when I staggered out to the road ahead, I saw no trace of any footprints of any kind at all. A gentle evening rain apparently had obliterated them. The fishy odor, too, was gone. Innsmouth's toppling staples and ruined rooftops loomed grayly towards the southeast, but not a living creature did I see. The reality of my experience was uncertain in my mind, but I felt some horrible truth lay behind it. Accordingly, I found my way to the neighboring town of Raleigh, where I got a meal and bought some presentable clothes. I caught the night train to Arkham, and the next day talked long and earnestly with government officials there, a process I repeated in Boston. My story was greeted with stern skepticism, but the G-men took careful notes, and several exchanged nervous whispers among themselves when they thought I wasn't looking. I gave up the balance of my tour and headed home to Toledo. But not before making one last genealogical visit to the Arkham Historical Society. Hello? Hello, Mr. Peabody.
Yes. You must be Mr. Phillips.
Yes, quite correct.
Yes.
Do you recognize my voice from our phone conversation?
Oh, well, not so much that as a certain look about your face. You have a faint, though distinct family appearance. When you've been doing this as long as I have, why, it comes quite easily.
I take it you've completed the research we discussed.
Oh, my, yes. When you told me your grandmother was Eliza Orne of Arkham, born in 1867, I heard a little bell ringing. Took me a while to find the correct reference, but it was right here, right in this old volume. Did you know that your grandmother's father, Benjamin Orne, that would be caused something of a local scandal right after the Civil War by marrying an orphan girl from New Hampshire?
No, it's the first time I've ever heard of it.
Ah, yes, it was apparently a sensation at the time. Seems the young bride's ancestry was very puzzling. She hailed from Essex County, but was educated in France, and never knew much about her own family.
Oh? What was her family name?
Oh, dear me, of course, I meant to tell you right away. It was, Marsh.
Marsh.
Yes. She was the natural daughter of some Marsh of prominence. They say she had those very distinctive Marsh family eyes. You seem to have a tiny suggestion of it yourself. I noticed that right away.
A shadow.
There is a shadow.
A shadow over Innsmouth. Innsmouth.
I put Mr. Peabody's foolish observations out of mind. Then in the middle of July, just a year after my Innsmouth experience, I paid a visit to my late mother's family in Cleveland. Their house had always depressed me, for it was there that I often visited my Arkham-born grandmother during my youth. I recall that she always seemed strange to me, and I could not think I grieved when she disappeared. I was 8 when they say she wandered off in grief after the suicide of her eldest son, my Uncle Douglas. It was in the attic of her house that Uncle Walter and I uncovered a box of Uncle Douglas's notes, letters, photographs, and heirlooms.
Ah, yes, this is the box, the one I've been telling you about.
I'm very anxious to see the photographs. I don't remember Uncle Douglas and my grandmother very well.
Well, the pictures are on the bottom. We'll get to those shortly. Take a look at this first.
What's this? What, a lock of her hair, some jewelry she wore?
Well, it's something she owned and enjoyed looking at. I don't think she ever wore it, at least not in public. What is it? Here we go. Just look at the workmanship in this piece. It's some sort of tiara, meant to be worn in a woman's hair. Isn't the little row of fish designs amazing? Look how they're shaped.
Uncle Walter, quick, the photograph. I must see my grandmother's photograph.
Well, yes. It's down here someplace. This is it here. This is what the grand lady looked like. I think this was taken about a month before she disappeared.
No! My own great-grandmother had been a Marsh, and the photograph of her own daughter bore the unmistakable evidence of the Innsmouth look. Was Captain Obed Marsh my own great-great-grandfather? And what was it so many had said about the shape of my own eyes? The curator in Arkham, the crazed drunkard at Innsmouth, even the grocery boy had mentioned it. And why, I ask, did my Uncle Douglas commit suicide? I've begun to have dreams. Dreams in which great watery spaces open before me, and I wander out through titanic sunken labyrinths and weedy cyclopean walls with grotesque fishes as my companions. Then the other shapes appear, filling me with nameless horror. I've given up my day job and assumed the static life of an invalid each morning, studying the mirror with mounting alarm as I see that I come more and more to resemble my shadowed ancestors. I've acquired the Innsmouth look. In my dreams, I meet my grandmother under the sea, where she lives in a phosphorescent palace of many terraces, with gardens of strangely leprous corals.
I have changed, child, as you will change also, and neither of us will ever die. For 80,000 years did my own grandmother, the Thaili, live here in the depths of Ilhanile, and it was here that she returned to after Obed Marsh died. Our kingdom was not destroyed when the Upper Earthmen launched death into the sea. Damaged, but not destroyed. The magic city of the Old Ones lives on. The Deep Ones can never fall, never be destroyed. Never be destroyed. Never.
I feel draw
be
towards the unknown sea
destroyed.
depths. I do not believe I need to wait for the full change as most have waited. Stupendous and unheard of splendors await me below, and I shall seek them soon. Ya, Ria, Cthulhu, Ya. Tonight I shall swim out to the rocky sanctuary of Devil Reef, and from there I shall dive down through the black abysses to Cyclopean and Minical Via, and there in that lair of the Deep Ones, I shall dwell amid wonders and glory forever. Ya, Ria, Cthulhu, Ya, Ria, Cthulhu, Cthulhu.
There is a shadow.
The Shadow Over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft was adapted for audio by Thomas E. Fuller and Gregory Nickel and featured the voices of Burl Boykin, Thomas E. Fuller, Bill Jackson, Doug Kay, Joyce Lee, Lee Millman, Gregory Nickel, and Brad Strickland. The director was Thomas E. Fuller. Production and soundscaping was by Henry Howard, live Foley effects by Daniel Taylor. The Shadow Over Innsmouth was recorded live at Dragon Con '89.